Chapter 4. Anne felt as though a swarm of butterflies had taken up residence in her inward parts. She was so nervous about the upcoming evening, she could barely sit still while the maid arranged her hair.
"What has gotten into you, my lady?"
Sally demanded, clearly impatient with her mistress's uncharacteristic behaviour. "Oh, do hurry, Sally, please. I am ever so anxious to get going."
"Well, I don't see no sense in hurrying since your aunt won't be ready any faster than usual, my lady. Now sit still, or your hair will be crooked, and then it'll be me that gets the sack, not you."
Anne subsided. She probably ought not to allow the servant to speak so disrespectfully to her, but she didn't have the heart to reprimand her. She was trying to save all her bravery and gumption for the evening ahead. She wondered if the Viscount would really follow through with his offer to help her. It still struck her as odd that he would make any effort to go out of his way to help her, when he had been so obviously furious with her before. But she wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. If he did help her, she would be eternally grateful. And for the first time since she had come to London, she was genuinely looking forward to the ball that evening. She watched as Sally's skilled hands twisted her hair into an intriguing style, transforming her usually nondescript strands into an elegant arrangement. Anne couldn't help admiring her reflection. Her excitement put extra colour into her cheeks, so she was less pale than usual. While she would never be a diamond of the first water, she wasn't going to be the mousiest girl in the room that evening, at least. Finally, the maid finished her ministrations and pronounced her ready for the night. Anne bounded to her feet, thanking the servant swiftly as she ran from the room. She was ready and waiting at the bottom of the stairs before her aunt and uncle made their appearance. When Lady Sophie saw her niece waiting in the foyer, she exclaimed, "Why, Anne, this is a surprise. You have never seemed so eager to go out before." She smiled coyly at her niece. "Is there something you wish to tell me?" "Not at all, my lady," Anne answered truthfully, as she had absolutely no desire for her aunt to know what the Viscount had offered. "Sally merely managed to get me ready faster than usual, is all." Anne was a little nervous about how unconvinced Lady Sophie appeared to be, but her uncle quickly changed the subject by clearing his throat. "Never mind about why we're ready when we are, my dear. Should we not just be grateful that we haven't been kept waiting by the girl? I would be just as glad to get on the way. You know how congested the streets are going to be." "Oh, hush now, husband. Do not be disagreeable. Very well, let us be off. I know you, though, my lord. You just want to get there so you can get in a few hands of whist before everyone is in their cups. Nothing wrong with that, is there?" The three had a chuckle over this familiar argument, as they were handed up into the carriage for the short drive to the Clarehurst ball. When their carriage finally reached the end of the long line and it was their turn to alight, Anne was struck with an attack of nerves so intense she doubted if she would be able to exit. She took herself sternly to task. Her and her father's future depended on her getting this right. She squared her shoulders, accepted the footman's outstretched hand, stepped down from the carriage, and followed in her aunt and uncle's wake, all the while praying that her fear was not written all over her features. Relief spread over her when not a single head turned when they were announced. Previously, her anonymity had caused her great consternation. Now it was a relief. If no one noticed her, it meant no one was talking about her, which meant that scandal had not yet attached itself to her name. And if the Viscount stayed true to his promise, then she might actually stand a chance of having a decent future. Those were a lot of ifs, she acknowledged, but she wasn't ready to back down just yet. "Good evening, my lady." Lord Dunbar's voice at her side nearly made her squeak with surprise, as though her thoughts had conjured him. "You are looking lovely." She almost snorted, but just managed not to. It would not do to allow herself to form an exaggerated opinion of herself. That would just be the final straw to make the bad situation worse. But despite those thoughts, she could not help the pink that stained her cheeks or prevent her lashes from sweeping down bashfully. She compressed her lips to prevent them from turning up flirtatiously. Anne bobbed a curtsy to the Viscount, but ignored his words. "It is pleasant to see you this evening, my lord." She knew her reply was weak, but she was not yet ready to be effusive. It had only been a day ago that he had been full of fury toward her. She wasn't ready to trust him fully just yet. The Viscount must have been able to read some of the wariness in her bearing, because she could see his eyes turn shrewd and assessing before he asked her, "Are you having second thoughts, my lady? Do you wish to call off my plan?" Her startled gaze flew to meet his. "Not at all, my lord. Why? Are you?" She swallowed a sudden lump of disappointment. "I would understand perfectly if you did, so you needn't be concerned on my behalf." She knew her words were a lie, but it was politeness and self-preservation that motivated her. "No, you wouldn't," he scoffed, bringing more heat to her cheeks and a reluctant laugh to her lips. "But no, I have not changed my mind. Now, come and dance with me." Contrarily, his rough words set her at ease, and she happily placed her hand in his as he pulled her into the country dance that was forming. They didn't exchange many words as they moved through the steps, joining and separating, but Anne was content for the first time in what felt like an age, or at least since she and her father had arrived in London. She allowed herself to relax and enjoy the moment while it lasted. Her worries would be waiting for her when it was over. It was a far cry from the first dance they had shared. Had that just been the night before? Anne wondered in disbelief. It felt as though they were both different people. She certainly felt as though she had changed drastically, and the Viscount was definitely acting differently. She still felt a sliver of distrust, but she would allow the moment to be while she merely enjoyed it. As the dance progressed, she began to feel a prickle of awareness. She gave up on enjoying the moment and allowed her eyes to trail around the room as she circled in the dance. They came to rest on two handsome men standing together next to the dance floor, watching her attentively. She must have twitched, because the Viscount suddenly became alert as well. "Is aught amiss, my lady?" he asked, his voice low, his head by her ear causing a shiver to run through her, in an attempt not to be overheard. "Nothing is wrong, my lord, but I do believe your friends are watching us." Lord Dunbar's hands tightened their hold on her reflexively. Watching his face, Anne could not detect even a flicker of reaction. His ability to remain impassive was impressive, especially when he normally seemed to be such an open book. Wesley felt his face freeze when he saw his friends watching them. He didn't want anyone to know they actually had a plan in place with regards to Lady Anne. It had to all look natural. He was relieved when the steps of the dance took them away from Grey and Sutton. He wished his friends were a little more capable of subtlety, but he would work with what he had. Without a word to Anne, Wesley finished the dance with a flourish, and then draped her hand through his elbow, escorting her toward his friends. It was time to follow through with his idea. "Lady Anne, please allow me to introduce my friends. This is Lord Sebastian Grey." Grey bowed, making her an elegant leg. "And this reprobate is Lord Spencer, the 5th Earl of Sutton." "I've already had the pleasure," the Earl drawled in reply. Anne couldn't help a little giggle at the look on the Earl's face in reaction to the Viscount's introduction. He raised a sardonic eyebrow, bowing his head haughtily to them both. She was just beginning to get truly nervous in his presence when she noticed the twinkle he could not quite hide shining in his eyes. With relief, she smiled widely in acknowledgment of his courteous bow. Just as the musicians were striking up what sounded as though it were going to be a waltz, the Earl bowed over Anne's hand once more. "Might I have the honour of this dance, my lady?" Anne wasn't sure if she wanted to dance the waltz with this particular gentleman, but didn't have the fortitude to refuse. Placing her hand in his, she offered up a prayer to whoever watches over misguided debutantes, and followed the Earl onto the dance floor. At first, they circled the room in silence. The Earl was most definitely a skilled dancer. Anne was just beginning to relax and sink into the enjoyment of the novel experience, when the Earl's rich baritone sounded near her ear. "What are your intentions, my dear?" "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me, I'm quite certain, my lady." His cold reply sent a chill through Anne. The gentleman hadn't exactly seemed affable previously, but now she could feel the swarm of butterflies taking flight in her stomach. She made every effort to keep the panic from her face. She would hate for everyone to be able to tell that she wanted to throw up on the dance floor. "My intentions toward what or whom, my lord?" she countered. "Are you being intentionally daft?" he asked, annoyance evident. "Toward Dunbar. As I explained to you previously, he is my friend and like a brother to me. I will not stand by idly while some chit sinks her claws into him." Anne's eyes grew wide as she tried to process what the Earl was saying to her. "I can assure you, I am not trying to sink anything into the Viscount. He has kindly offered to help me with the situation I face. I accepted his offer. He was of the opinion that you, as his friend, would be willing to help him." She broke off as fear surged into her throat. She was trying so desperately not to be a ninny, but it was terribly difficult to break a lifetime of habits in the space of a week. "Are you trying to use guilt in order to gain my cooperation?" Anne kept her gaze fixed on his expertly tied cravat. It was much better for her nerves than looking the Earl in the face. "I am not actually trying to gain your cooperation, my lord. This whole idea can be laid at Lord Dunbar's feet. I would never have thought of such a thing on my own. He thought it would be brilliant and that you would help. It is perfectly all right if you do not wish to. I will be no further behind with or without your help, my lord." She could feel the Earl's piercing gaze searching her face, but she still could not make herself meet his eyes. Anne had no idea what he was thinking, but thankfully he did not leave her in suspense for long. "I will be keeping an eye on you, my lady. Do not doubt it. But Dunbar has asked for my help, and I have promised to provide it. See that you don't make me regret it." Anne didn't have any idea how to answer these words, and heaved a sigh of relief as she heard the music slowing to an end. She pasted a smile onto her face as they strolled to the edge of the dance floor. Before she had a chance to even muster up some sort of farewell for the Earl, Lord Grey was there asking for her hand for the next song. "You are a skilled dancer, my lady," Grey complimented, making Anne's cheeks heat up. "Thank you, my lord. It is easy to dance when you have a skilled partner." "You must have had a lot of practice since you have been in London." Anne was beginning to suspect the nobleman's affability was merely a ploy to get her to relax. She could feel the very opposite happening, and almost stumbled as he guided her into the next turn. She stifled her sigh and decided she'd had enough of her cowardice for the evening. After taking a deep breath, she lifted her chin and looked the nobleman in the eye before stating, "His Grace, the Duke of Wrentham, and the Viscount of Bracondale are very lucky to have friends like you and the Earl, and you are lucky to have them. Surely you realize that an insignificant female such as me could pose no real threat to either of them." "I am so sorry to have to disagree with you, my lady. A female such as you poses a very definite danger." Lord Grey countered his assessment with a charming smile, but Anne was not sidetracked. She held his gaze and returned his smile with a tight one of her own. They moved around the room in silence while Grey looked innocent and unconcerned, and Anne battled with her anxiety. Finally, she mustered up the gumption to demand, "In what way could I be considered dangerous?" "A lovely young woman with a mind of her own and a desire for marriage is a distinct threat to any gentleman wishing to hang on to his unwedded state, my lady. I am sure you realize that." Lord Grey's reasonable tone made Anne grit her teeth. "I thought the Viscount had been clear that I was not setting my cap at any of you. He had proposed that the three of you paying attention to me will draw the notice of other gentlemen who are of a mind to marry." "But you clearly do not understand the male mind, my dear, and that is where your threat lies. There are two things about men that worry me about you. Men are competitive creatures, so one or more of us may not take well to the attentions of the other gentlemen after we have been spending time with you. As well, our dear friend Wrentham has beaten it into our heads that we must at all times act the gentleman around gently bred females such as you, and that could lead us astray in too many ways to number." Anne blinked owlishly at her dance partner, and was certain she must look like a simpleton, but she did not understand a word of what he had just said. She told him as much. "I am aware you were speaking the English language, my lord, but I fear your meaning was not at all clear to me." "That is just as well, my dear. Pay me no mind. I have decided that it does not matter if you are a threat. Dunbar is correct. Wrentham would expect us to help you, so we shall, and we shall no doubt quite enjoy ourselves in the process." With that pronouncement, Lord Grey put an end to their discussion by increasing the vigour of their steps and swirling her around the floor with a flourish, drawing more attentive eyes toward them. Knowing it was all part of the plan, Anne admonished herself not to allow the attention to go to her head. "Wouldn't that just seal my fall into ignominy if I were to fall for one of the trio?" she thought with horror. Instead of escorting her back to her aunt, Lord Grey kept her hand and tucked it into his elbow. "Come along, my lady. You surely must need a drink after all this dancing." He didn't wait for her to reply as he headed to the refreshment room. They sipped the surprisingly tasty punch and exchanged pleasantries for a moment while the crowds around them shifted and jostled. Anne felt the speculative gazes upon her and fought against the regret that she had agreed to this plan. Lord Grey must have read her mind. "Do not turn lily-livered on us now, my lady. We are just getting to the good part. Give it a couple more minutes, and you shall see." True to his words, less than 5 minutes later, a gentleman that Anne was sure she had been introduced to, but could not for the life of her remember his name, approached to request her hand for the quadrille that was about to form in the ballroom. With a curtsy to Grey, Anne left on the other gentleman's arm. Anne spent the rest of the night on the dance floor. It was the first time in her life that she did not spend a single minute as a wallflower. It sent a satisfied thrill to the very centre of her feminine soul, despite the fact that it had been orchestrated by the Viscount. Even other ladies were appearing to be friendlier towards her, no doubt in an effort to snag some of the gentlemen for themselves. But Anne didn't care what the reasons were. She was enjoying nearly every moment of the evening. The only fly in the ointment was the anxious feeling she got whenever she felt the Viscount's watchful gaze following her. She doubted he meant to do so, but she felt as though he were waiting to see if she would fail. She decided to call him out on his behaviour. Instead of ignoring his eyes upon her, she met his gaze and offered him as dazzling a smile as she could muster. She wanted to grin when he blinked and turned away. Her grin died a quick death, however, when the gentleman she was dancing with led her to the side of the dance floor and she discovered the Viscount was there waiting for her. "I do believe this is to be our turn, my lady," he said as he bowed over her hand. Anne didn't have the nerve to contradict his words, So there was nothing she could do except put her hand in his and follow him back onto the dance floor. She couldn't gauge his mood, so she kept silent as they were swept into the rhythm of the music. They circled the room once, twice, before he finally broke the silence. "You seem to be enjoying yourself," he offered conversationally. "I am," she agreed, without going into detail. She kept a pleasant smile on her face and avoided his eyes. "And our plan seems to be working out rather well," he continued, as though she had said nothing. "That's true," she acknowledged as well, a small smile finally dawning on her lips. She allowed her eyes to rise to meet his, and it was as though he had been waiting for that moment. His gaze ensnared hers and held it. It felt to her as though he could read her soul while he stared into her eyes. "What is going on inside that head of yours?" he asked softly. She tried to blank her thoughts so he couldn't read her mind, but she couldn't hide it. Instead of excluding him, she tried to seem unconcerned. She lifted her shoulder in a small shrug despite the steps of the dance. She finally admitted to him what was making her uncomfortable. "I'm not enjoying you watching my every step, as though you think I'm a villain, my lord. While it is true that I agreed to try to entrap the Duke into marriage, I had no intention of hurting him. Now that I have been made aware of the fact that I had been thoughtless to the point of foolishness, I am making every effort to be a more thoughtful person. You do not need to fear for the gentleman of the ton." "I have no idea what you're talking about, my lady. I realize when I first confronted you that is exactly what I thought. But now that I have gotten to know you better, I am quite convinced that you won't be hurting anyone." "Then why do you keep watching me at every opportunity?" Anne was frustrated with his lack of sense. "Because I fear that someone else is going to hurt you." Anne could only blink at him in silence. It had never occurred to her that he could have such a concern. She actually giggled at the thought. "It is hardly a matter for laughter, my lady," he objected. This only made her giggle harder. "I apologize, my lord, but you really are not making much sense. But never mind. Our dance is about to end. You needn't worry about me. I have my aunt and uncle to look after me, my lord. Have no fear."